I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo. Good evening, Bowling Green. And good afternoon, Columbus. And hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here with my fantabulous co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I will be crafting an incredible hour of radio called For a Green Future. And For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families, and the trees that are budding right now, and the tulips and the snowdrops that are sticking up out of the ground, and the birds that are on their way back, and the fish and the critters and the shrews and the penguins and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we are all together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show for you today. We're going to chat for a little bit here, next 10 minutes or so. And then we have an interview with Angela Bischoff, who's with the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. Yes, we went off to Canada to get a guest for this week's show. And she's going to be talking about some interesting things up there in Ontario in terms of energy. Then we will hear from our fantastic advertisers and patrons, to whom we are eternally grateful. And then, Rebecca, what will you be talking about today?
I will be talking about African penguins. Subtitle, Becca's Innocence is Completely Destroyed.
African penguins, okay. Yeah. Sounds kind of like a...
AKA a kind of penguin, which is which is another word for mule and starts with J. And there was a television with that title.
Okay.
Starts with Jack.
Okay, all right.
Rest of it, I'm not sure whether we're allowed to say on the radio or not.
Probably not. Yeah,
okay.
Probably not.
That's also a word for them.
Okay.
They make an awful lot of noise, to be critical.
So
they're not quiet, demure animals, I'm going to say.
So kind of rowdy, randy penguins.
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
Noisy.
And then it'll be ecological news. So we've got a lot of ecological news to cover this week. There's all sorts of stuff happening, environmentally speaking. So stick around for that. So, and, one thing that we really appreciate every week is being able to talk to you folks and you being able to listen. And it's kind of a time in American history where we have sort of taken that for granted, that people could just get on the radio with have a program like ours and say whatever we want to say and whatever needs saying. Unfortunately, this is under threat right now in the United States. I mean, you've probably heard, because it was on all the major news outlets, about the fella in Columbia University there who was Mahmoud Khalil, the guy with the green card they arrested and took him off from New York to Louisiana, and they're probably going to deport him even though he has, full citizenship rights because he's got a green card. This idea that we have, that our speech could be curtailed, that we don't really have free speech. This has been growing for a while. This Khalil guy. This is just sort of the latest step. It's been going incrementally more and more. And I put sort of the start of it back at the 2012 election, because, as regular listeners know, I'm a Green Party guy, and our candidate for president in 2012 was Jill Stein. And a lot of people don't know this, but she spent the 2012 presidential debates handcuffed to a metal chair in a warehouse along with her vice presidential candidate, Sherry Honkala, because that was supposedly a town hall style presidential debate. And when she and Sherry Honkala tried to go in, because they had, they'd been given membership passes, people who had been invited gave her their seats so that she and Sherry could at least show up for the presidential debate. Instead, they got arrested, they got transported to a warehouse, and they spent 8 hours chained to metal chairs. And so, this is the kind of thing that just sort of gets glossed over. People are like, oh, that's just the Green Party. And now they're just kind of like, oh, that's just Mahmoud Khalil. That's just a graduate student in Columbia. That's not me. That's not my friends. But the fact that we let the first one go by, and there were no repercussions, this is kind of what's led us to the point now where we can have the second one There've been many other events since then where people's freedom of speech is being steadily curtailed. And now we're kind of reaching the precipice where it can be sort of, if we don't stand up for this one, then they'll start doing it to everybody. And that puts us at the same range, the same sort of milieu as Russia and China and a lot of places that don't have freedom of speech, which is what we're supposed to be guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. And what happens in places like Russia and China is that basic information never gets transferred. We were talking a lot about that last week with the Unplugged Nuclear Power event that we had on March 11th, Tuesday, where we boycotted grid power for 24 hours because we're trying to remind people of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, that a lot of young people today don't even know that happened. They have no idea. Fukushima doesn't mean anything to them because they weren't aware in 2011 of what was going on when 3 nuclear power plants had a full meltdown and had explosions, and one of them had a big mushroom cloud. That's how Chernobyl's regarded in Russia right now, as in the young generation doesn't even know Chernobyl happened, even though, the whole world knows about it and it contaminated the whole world. So what we're seeing right now with the Trump administration, unfortunately, is a real effort to eliminate the basic sources of information, the most basic, just data gathering, the completely apolitical, it's just literally just scientists with their little measuring devices. And I'm holding up a graph. It's just this, we've referred to this before, but Mauna Loa in Hawaii is the longest running, most accurate, most often used by scientists recordings of what CO2 is doing in the atmosphere, because it's farther away from human activity than any other CO2 monitoring station. It's been going the longest. And I have a graph in front of me, and I'm going to hold it up for the video and just show you, Rebecca. But it basically, it goes from 2020 to 2025, and it shows both the immediate, the monthly measurements of CO2 and the average of those measurements. And
well, the real thing is a lot more spiky.
Yeah, it's very spiky. I mean, it jumps up and down with the spring and
But you can see the overall trend
in the
with
winter.
with the averages. Yeah.
right. The overall trend is just it's going up. Right. In fact,
Up.
we once again just had a record CO2 reading last month. Record CO2 in the atmosphere, and of course, as we know, CO2 drives temperature, and then temperature drives a whole bunch of other stuff, including. I have yet another graph here. This is a graph of the satellite record of sea level rise. This one's from NASA, and that goes from 1993 to basically 2025. And what happened last year is they had a record increase in in sea levels. Okay, now using their past sea level rise projections, and again, this is just another graph that's steadily going up from 93 to 2024, and using the past curve, they predicted what 2024 was supposed to be, and they only expected 0.43 centimeter increase, and instead they got 0.59.
Yowza.
So they were way off. It had expanded a whole lot more than they expected. And the total rise since 1993 is 10.1 centimeters, which is about, the ocean has risen 4 inches since 1993. And you might say, oh gosh, so what? But the thing is, every time there's flooding, every time there's a tsunami, every time there's one of these king tides or ultra high tides, every inch of increased sea level translates into hundreds of yards of increased flooding and damage to property and people, and houses getting washed away and beaches getting washed away. And so this is just very basic information, and sometimes we forget about covering the basics because there's so much news happening in other directions. But sea level rise, CO2 level rise, methane level rise, all these things are the scientific foundation for basically the idea that we're having global warming. And of course, we here on For a Green Future, we take this a little step further, as we also say that the whole planet is caught in what are we caught in, Rebecca? What's that phrase?
Would that be a positive feedback loop?
Yes, a positive
Oh my gosh.
feedback loop. And I think it's pretty clear that that's why NASA's predictions were off, because they just took this trend line and they just mathematically extended it a little further, but they're not taking into account that we're in a positive feedback loop, and so that the heat the Earth has is causing more CO2 to be released, which causes more heat, which causes more CO2, which causes more heat, which causes more CO2, and that creates a positive feedback loop, just like microphone feedback, or just like an atomic bomb, where you shoot one neutron in and you pop 2 neutrons out, and each of those pops out 2 more neutrons, and then 4 more, and then 8 more, etc. This is why having this scientific data is so incredibly important right now, because we need the scientists to catch up. We need the scientists to figure out, oh, our prediction was wrong because we're not taking into account this is a positive feedback loop. And now what they did analyze, what they did figure out, was that all the previous years where we've had the sea level rising, they've said that 2/3 of that was from fresh water pouring in from things like the melting Greenland glaciers. And 1/3 of it was what they call thermal expansion, which is just when you heat something up, it gets bigger, it expands. And you've seen lots of examples of this in your life, I'm sure. But this year, 2024, it turned out it flipped. It turned out that the thermal expansion was 2/3 of the increase, and that the sea level rise just from extra water pouring in was only 1/3. And what this means is that the ocean is heating up much faster than they thought it was, and causing more expansion. And so that will also contribute to the gigantic positive feedback loop that the world is caught in, and increase the rate even faster. And of course, just today, we are, I think it's 18 degrees above average today here Northwest Ohio. And the rate at which we're going to have above average temperatures and the amount that we're above average is going to also keep increasing. And just as this is becoming absolutely critical for our survival, the Trump administration is cutting off the funding to take measurements like this. He's closing, his plan right now is to close the Mauna Loa Observatory. And so, if you don't record the amount of CO2, how could you make the argument that we're cooking ourselves because of the CO2? And so it's just absolutely insane. And I know those of you who voted for Trump did not vote for this, but this is what you get. And we tried to warn you that this is what you were going to get, but people just didn't believe us. Sometimes, Rebecca, I feel like we're the warning label on a cigarette pack.
There we go. Yeah. Or as Sting said, they go crazy in congregations. They only get better one by one.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's hope that the folks listening today are amongst those ones.
Yes.
And so, of course, the effect of global warming is global. And so we don't restrict ourselves to guests from the United States. Today, we have a very special guest from Ontario, Angela Bischoff. And so let's go to that interview now. Welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your organization?
It's Angela Bischoff, Ontario Clean Air Alliance.
Okay, well, welcome, Angela. So what are the goals of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, and what kind of things do you advocate for and against?
So we work exclusively on electricity issues in Ontario, and we were formed in the late 90s to call for 100% coal phase out. At the time, the province got a quarter of its electricity from coal, and it was causing really bad smog days in the GTA, or the Greater Toronto Area. And so as an environmental group, we formed, or just a bunch of enviros, we formed in 1997 to call for the coal phase out, and we won. We were politically smart enough to get the parties to fight against each other. And then when the new government was elected, they had already committed to the coal phase out. So they made it happen. We had to keep their feet to the fire. It took 17 years. But Ontario was the first jurisdiction in the world to phase out coal for environmental and health reasons, and that was in 2014. And now, of course, the whole world is moving toward a coal-free future, including Canada, which is committed to phasing out coal by 2030. So once we sort of had that campaign under wraps, then we turned our attention to how else can we move Ontario to 100% renewable electricity future. That's our goal. And so we're campaigning to phase out gas and nuclear power. At the present time, more than half our electricity comes from nuclear, and the current government is anti-renewables, pro-nuclear, and pro-gas. So they're going full steam ahead on their nuclear gas plan, and we're advocating for no new nuclear or gas infrastructure, phase them out and go with wind, water, solar.
All right. Yeah, I asked you on today because you folks had sent out an email that you called on your premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, to tear up the province's contract for 4 new GE Hitachi nuclear reactors. Tell us about those reactors and why you think they're a bad idea for Ontario.
Okay, well, Ontario already has 18 or 16 working nuclear reactors. The GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, which is 4-point-something million people, has already right now 10 nuclear reactors. And they're talking about building not only 4 new GE Hitachi reactors, but also the world's largest nuclear reactor further east. So they're just like, it's nuclear madness. But the project which is furthest along, which, they've already got licenses to get the site ready. That's as far as they've gone so far, really. They're just working on the site. But they've gotten like $1 billion loan from the federal government, and they're like moving forward with these 4 new SMRs, or small modular reactors, just about 50 kilometers east of Toronto. So, within evacuation zone. But these 4 SMRs that they're proposing are a US-based company, GE Hitachi. They've never been built before. They're still in the design phase. They won't tell us how much they're going to cost. They essentially have a blank check to build them because in Ontario, the bulk of our electricity is owned and operated by a provincial company called Ontario Power Generation. So it's, the citizens own this company. It's public company. They don't have to bid for contracts. So they get this blank check to build these new reactors. And, it's an American company, and it requires enriched uranium fuel. Like all of Canada's current reactor fleet to date are CANDUs. They are Canadian technology, and they just require uranium. But these new GE Hitachi reactors will require an enriched uranium, which we don't do in Canada, and we don't want to do it. And you guys do it in the States, so we're going to be buying the enriched uranium from you. And, we think in this politically volatile state that we are in with the United States, why would we be locking ourselves into purchasing fuel and technology from the States? And not only the fuel and technology, but also the gas, because from the States, most of our gas comes from the United States. We're ramping up gas-fired electricity so that we can roll out these new nuclear projects. I mentioned a couple of new nuclear projects that they're proposing, but there are others as well. There's a bunch of rebuilds, and there's plans for another one on Lake Huron, another nuclear station. And while they're rolling out these, like it's been estimated around $400 billion of projects, they are going to use gas as backup because they are ideologically opposed to renewable power. In fact, when they were elected, the first thing our current Conservative government did was rip up contracts with 758 renewable energy companies, including ripping out wind turbines that were already installed. And we had to pay out those companies for their lost power, 200 and some million dollars. So this Conservative government is just like all about nuclear and gas to the exclusion of renewables and conservation. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about those turbines that Doug Ford tore out, the fully functioning turbine. So he is kind of making a lot of political hay right now by like standing up to the US and Trump. But at the same time, with these reactors, it seems like he's opposed, well, with the reactors and with eliminating solar and wind, it seems like he's opposed to sort of homegrown Canadian energy.
We call it electricity separatism. First of all, it's a conservative government, and they are essentially climate deniers, and they don't believe we have any environmental issues. And this is just one example of the whole, list of environmental crimes they are creating. Their continued dependence on nuclear and gas. In the middle of a climate crisis, they're ramping up the highest cost and the highest climate impact electricity sources. So they're essentially an anti-environmental government, and they have a majority because of our first past the post electoral system. Even though they only get a small percentage of the vote, they get a majority to do whatever they want. So we are calling for, instead of a north-south grid, because Doug Ford claimed that he wanted to build more electricity lines with the United States, build out nuclear stations in Ontario, and export our power to the States. That's what Doug Ford's plan has been for the last several months. Now that the tariff war has ramped up, he's not blustering about that right now, but we've been arguing for many months at the same time that he's been calling for more north-south electricity sales. We're saying let's cut off electricity. We're not cut them off, but let's not move in that direction. Let's go east-west and do a renewable electricity grid. Our neighbors to the east, Manitoba, are almost 100% powered with water, and our neighbors to the west, Manitoba, and our neighbors to the east, Quebec, they likewise are almost 100% powered by water. And they're both also investing in wind power and solar power. And we all know that's the future. And we should be exchanging electricity with our neighbors right to the East Coast across Canada, rather than a north-south, dependence on, a neighbor, which isn't maybe appreciative of our government or our way of life.
Yeah, well, I think I'm wondering if you're getting a good response to your call for tearing up the nuke things. We hear that Canadians are angry at the U.S. We see a lot of talk about Canadians boycotting U.S. goods. How deep is this anger, and do you think we could extend it to the nuclear?
You know, my sense, like, I don't get the anger. I don't see the anger. I don't see people seething here at my office. People aren't pissed off at Americans, but I do see, on social media in particular, we see, pictures of store shelves with all the American products taken off in the liquor stores, all, empty shelves, empty, airport lineups where people have canceled their March break trips. Like, I think people are taking it seriously. There is an apparent boycott of, American goods and travel. And so I think people are taking it seriously. Are certainly, governments are, blustering on. In the Canadian governments, provincial governments, they're all, talking about it, with the exception of a couple of Western politicians in Alberta in particular. They're, actually connecting with politicians in the States. There's, sort of a campaign to join United States, but those are like the super right-wing oil and gas drill baby drill type governments. So it is a big deal. I mean, it's really taking over the social media sphere, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well,
And I
I
just
guess
want to clarify, go ahead.
well, I guess it's good to part of what I wanted to kind of do was talk to an actual Canadian, because of course the only information we get is across the social media, and according to that, Canadians are super angry, but it sounds like you're more just
Right.
taking it seriously as opposed to like seething in anger. So
Serious, and also there's a lot of fear. Like, you guys are a way bigger country in terms of military might, economic might. Like, you could really do a lot of damage. I mean, I think, a lot of companies are worried they're going to be closing their doors. And we're also, we're very threatened by Trump and his call for, to take our resources or to change the border so that you guys get the Great Lakes.
So could you describe in a little more detail the energy future that you see for Ontario? What is 100% renewables really practical in Canada?
It absolutely is. And there's been a number of different groups that have done studies to show how it could happen, including Mark Jacobson at Stanford U. He's done a whole analysis on how Canada could be 100% renewably powered. But also we have Canadian organizations that have done the same analysis. And essentially we would be, investing in energy conservation and ramping up wind and solar power and having more electricity exchange between the provinces. That's kind of the goal. Putting solar panels on every building. Like, we've done a study, we could be putting solar panels on parking lots all throughout Toronto and on every building, and shut down the gas plant in the middle of downtown Toronto. There's so many opportunities. One being, we could put wind power in the Great Lakes. And Michigan had started a project. I think it's on hold right now. There was a study done for the Ontario government about a decade ago that said 64 sites in Lake Ontario, Erie, and Lake Huron could essentially 64 wind farms that would be, 10 kilometers offshore. So you wouldn't see it on your side of the lakes. We wouldn't see it on our side of the lakes. Could provide all of Ontario's electricity needs. And, you could do it in the States too. That's how we phase out fossil fuels and nuclear power too. And like, for example, we could be like Quebec has massive surplus of water power, and they could act as their storage reservoirs could act as a backup battery for Ontario's wind and solar power. So when we have surplus power, wind and solar, we send it to Quebec. And when we have below average wind and solar power, Quebec releases the water behind the dams and powers more of Ontario's power. We have the grid between Quebec and Ontario. I'd mentioned earlier about that Ontario is an electricity separatist. What I meant by that is we want to produce it in Ontario, despite the fact that we get most of our gas from the United States, and now we're buying nuclear technology from the United States. We pretend to be independent, of our neighbors to the east and west or to the south. But really, what that means is they're just protecting the nuclear industry. Our province is primarily powered by nuclear and gas and some water power, but they're not substantially growing that. And we don't support new large dams. So we're talking about being a lot more efficient. And of course, the Rocky Mountain Institute claims there's so many great opportunities still to lower our demand, even with the electrification of heating buildings and the electrification of transportation. We can still reduce our demand through smart grids, smart technology. And finally, we can use our electric vehicles to power back into the grid, and our surplus wind of solar panels on our roofs to power back into the grid. That's smart technology. And in fact, the whole world is moving in that direction, purchasing wind and solar power. 85% of new electricity supply in the next 5 years, according to the International Energy Agency, is going to come from new wind and solar. Meanwhile, Ontario is going gas and nuclear. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's only because they're ideologically driven to protect those jobs. We have a status quo industry, a nuclear industry. There are thousands of jobs already in the nuclear industry. For them to shut that down, and all our nuclear reactors are old. They were all built in the 70s and 80s. So, do they shut them down now and transition to renewable future? That's what we're advocating for. But they are, as conservatives, they're trying to protect not the environment, but protect the establishment. And so they're choosing more of the same, nuclear and gas.
Well, so how can people follow your organization?
Thanks. If you go to cleanairalliance.org, that's our website, and you check it out, a window will pop up saying, join our mailing list and join. And about once a week, I'll send out a bulletin. It comes from me. We're a small team, and it gives you an opportunity to send messages to politicians, action alerts. Just you can follow the issues from an Ontarian perspective or a Canadian environmental perspective, though we do concentrate on Ontario electricity issues.
And is there anything you'd like to add?
I guess just that, the transition is happening. It's happening around the world. The green energy transition, that's a big, big, huge part of the climate crisis that we're all dealing with. And, big oil and gas, fossil fuels, nuclear, that's what's electing, the bad guys in North America for sure. It's really, I think, the battle of our time to transition to a cleaner, greener, renewable energy future. And it's gonna happen in our lifetimes. It's just how much bloodbath in the meantime are we gonna have to have to face. But it's happening already around the world. It's already happening, and North America better get with the times. I mean, even Texas is with the times. You guys are replacing old gas plants for wind and solar, in particular solar. There's so much surplus power in Texas already that you're finding negative pricing at certain times of the day. So solar is the future, and Trump and Doug Ford are doing their best to stall this market change to the lowest. Solar is supposedly the lowest cost electricity option ever in the history. What are we waiting for? Let's go. This is our future.
All right. Well,
It's our now.
Here, here. That was a great finish there by Angela Bischoff. And thanks so much for listening to that interview and to get another perspective to see what they're saying out there, up there in Canada. And what was your opinion? What did you think of what she had to say? Or what's your opinion on any environmental issue that we're talking about today, or any environmental issue at all? And what do you think when you hear about things like Trump censoring, shutting down the CO2 measurement at Mauna Loa? Give us a call, 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Okay, now it's time to thank our patrons and sponsors. For a Great Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. Imagine a place where nature meets adventure, where you can climb, paddle, fish, and explore. That place, it's right here in Wood County. The Wood County Park District is here to protect, preserve, and inspire. We conserve natural and cultural treasures so you can enjoy outdoors like never before. By maintaining green spaces, providing fun programs, restoring wildlife habitats, and leading outdoor adventures. Want to connect with nature? Try your hand at archery, bouldering, geocaching, paddling, rappelling, and more. Whether you're seeking experience or a peaceful retreat, our parks are open every day from 8 a.m. until 30 minutes past sunset all year round. Come explore, get outside, experience nature. Your parks, your adventures waiting for you. Find us online at wcparks.org or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X. Or you can always give us a call at 419-353-1897. The Wood County Park District, preserving nature, creating adventure, and inspiring a greener future. And of course, we are also brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who understand that there's a price you have to pay in order to have freedom of speech. It's not enough just to say, oh, yes, we like having people give us more information and bring us perspectives that we're not getting any other way. But sometimes you have to actually physically, financially support that. And these folks understand this. And so what they've done is they've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. And then these wonderful people went through and chose a membership level that matched their budget so they don't have to suffer. And we all benefit. So now once they've chosen that level, they sign up, and every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and helps us to keep this show on the air. And it's, unfortunately, this show is becoming increasingly important because the other sources of information are getting shut down one by one. And so we're going to stay on the air just as long as we can, but we do need help. So consider becoming a patron. Okay, Rebecca. So now, what are you asking us to consider?
Okie dokie. Well, last week, some of my friends and I got to go on a behind-the-scenes tour of the Penguin House in the Toledo Zoo, where they have African penguins, also called...
Oh, hold on just a second, Rebecca. We actually have a caller.
A caller.
Yes,
Oh,
hi. Caller, go ahead.
Hello. Yes. Okay. I was appreciative of the interview you had with the lady from Ontario. It's kind of for me, the whole nuclear thing, it So as she said, we got renewables, which are, so the Republican Party traditionally has been they lead with conservative, right? Which used to mean fiscally conservative as well as socially, right?
Once
So
upon a time,
like
yeah.
It seems like these days they've turned their back on fiscal conservatism, which I consider myself basically a socialist, but I've been fiscally conservative my whole life. In other words, I believe in not wasting anything. So I guess that's conservatism in a way. And by a literal term of the definition of the word, but I don't understand. I get it because it's being a bully. That's basically what it is Trump is a bully, and the people that dig that, he's telling, them and this and that and all, but basically he's not really, what he is he's caving and acquiescing to big oil and all these other people and to the Gateses about their nuke and all that stuff. That's the way I see it, but he's blustery and all that stuff, and it's so immature and childish, the whole thing. But it's sad. I can't. I tell you, actually, I don't listen to this show sometimes because I can't take any more bad news.
I feel the same way.
I just can't do it. It's so. I've been my whole life. I've been trying to advocate and do what I can, and it gets difficult to keep on trucking, as they used to say. But I just want to let you know that I appreciate that. So.
Well, we certainly understand. Sometimes it's very hard to do this show too, but we also try to temper it with the positive, with the uplifting. And as Angela said, the world is making the transition. Solar and wind and battery storage are.
You can always go backwards, though. Look what's happening around the world in governments that are electing. Even in didn't Norway just elect a conservative government? They can turn those things back. It's so just I'll be honest with you. I consider myself a bad citizen since the last election because I've consumed less news and I'm less aware of what's going on in the world generally.
Norway may have elected a conservative, but Norway still had, I believe it was 97% of their new car sales were electric cars. So even with a conservative government, they're not going to turn those electric cars in and go back to gas.
I get it. You're right. Now I'm just feeling negative about that, but I appreciate you. Thank you.
I understand. Yeah. Thanks so much for the call. Yeah. So,
Bye.
And I don't know. What do you folks think about that? 877-909-1007. Happy to get you on the air. Are you just too depressed to even look at this question, or do you think there's some hope? The way Angela Bischoff, just as an example, she doesn't give up. I've been following their organization for a long time, and good times or bad, they're very consistent, always promoting the right choices, the clean energy, the cheaper energy. That's a huge point, is that this nuclear power is the most expensive form of energy ever devised. And so it hurts consumers. We always say we're talking about your wealth, health, and happiness. Every time a nuke plant gets built, it hurts your wealth because that's a most expensive form of generation versus wind and solar, which are the cheapest. So, but appreciate the call. I hope we can give you there for a little bit of therapy so you could listen to some more in the future. We'll try to get more upbeat. And speaking of which, back to a cute and fun thing.
If there's
penguins.
Anything upbeat in the world, it is definitely African penguins and penguins in general. They are adorable. I know they do stuff, but because I listen to Hood Nature, but
here.
Overall, they're really adorable. They are small, flightless birds with black and white plumage and a donkey-like bray, which we heard a lot during our visits. They were very talkative. They're 18 to 27 inches tall, 6 to 10 pounds, black feet, pointed beak, with a bare patch above their eyes, which is important for various reasons. They live in large colonies on rocky coasts and islands of Namibia and South Africa. which I think maybe it might be having a drought or something bad right now. I hear stuff. Anyway, according to the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, they are called, their Latin name is the Spheniscus demersus, sorry. And they can tell each other apart, and people can tell them apart by the black markings on their white chest. That's the individual feature. It's like a fingerprint, blah, blah, blah. The males are usually slightly larger. I noticed as they pointed this out during the tour that some of the ones that were slightly larger were males. And they have 3 kinds of vocalizations: bray to attract a mate, yell to defend territory, and haw to locate each other when one is on land and the other is at sea. So yeah, we heard them bray a lot. I don't know about the other ones. And yeah, then at one point they showed us how to make baby penguins twice. So
the penguins showed you, right?
Yes, they
Okay,
did. They wanted to make sure I'd gotten it. So they're critically endangered. They have a bare patch above their eye, which I mentioned. It helps them cope with the high South African temperatures. Because apparently the hotter they are, the more blood goes to the bare patch, which makes it look pinker, and then the blood gets cooled off at the surface there. They display aggression by gaping, bill pointing, pecking, and bill jabbing. So if a penguin is pecking and jabbing you with its bill, it's being aggressive. I know that's a shock. So
right.
the hotter, and that was the end of the stuff from the San Diego Zoo there. But yeah, environmental threats to penguins include overfishing, climate changes, which affects prey availability, oil spills. Hungry parents can abandon chicks, for example, which is bad. Rising sea level damage to nesting sites, which are also damaged by human activity, beachside, and guano mining, which can destroy nesting sites. So they suffer from being such useful birds, actually. And they get entangled in discarded fishing gear, which is all part of why they are critically endangered.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. And
they really looked like they wanted to. They were kind of looking at us through the little fence, like they wanted to find out what we were made of exactly. They were trying to sneak between the 2 fences to peck this one person who was with us.
Interesting. All right. Yes. Well, so a cute little aspect of nature there, the penguin.
Yes, definitely.
The African penguin. All right. Okay, so on to ecological news, and apologies to our listeners who might find this a little bit depressing, but we've reported before. We've been following what's been happening over there in North Dakota with the Greenpeace trial, which is a trial energy transfer to pipeline companies suing Greenpeace for $300 million, claiming that they organized the Standing Rock protests, which is a complete lie. But that didn't stop them from suing, which makes this what's called a SLAP lawsuit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. The trial went much quicker than expected. They actually finished the trial on Thursday, and then all that's left are the closing arguments, which are probably going to happen Monday and possibly Tuesday also. But this is important to remember that this is a case that the federal courts threw out because it's just so ridiculous they wouldn't even hear it. So Energy Transfer took the case to the Morton County Courthouse.
Nobody else saw Greenpeace there. Is Greenpeace in the room with us right now?
Good question. But they, unfortunately, in Morton County, the most common employer is the oil and gas industry, and it turns out that something like 10 out of the 12 jurors actually work for the oil industry.
Oh, my God.
So this may not be a good sign for Greenpeace. I attended a Zoom meeting from Greenpeace on this last Thursday, and they also had a couple other guests on there, one woman from the Philippines and a woman from South America, basically talking about how they're also being persecuted. In fact, the South American woman pointed out that about 120 environmental activists a year are executed in South America, mostly by mining companies, but also by logging companies.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And she said that the Trump's cutting of the USAID has actually hurt all efforts to protect the Amazon, because quite a bit of that was funded by the U.S. And she also said that what Trump is doing with all his actions, he's basically empowering the bad guys.
Yep, that stands to reason.
You know, the ones that are doing illegal logging and illegal mining. They're like, hey, we've got a kindred spirit there in Washington, D.C. So unfortunately, that was all very depressing. But it was also inspiring to see these women who actually personally face danger because they are environmental activists, but it hasn't slowed down their determination one little bit in order to try to protect everything and protect us physically. So thank you to those women, and thanks to Greenpeace. Fingers crossed on the trial. Next story, off to Jet Propulsion Labs. This is a story March 13th on their website. Title, NASA analysis shows unexpected amount of sea level rise in 2024.
Uh-oh.
So as we were saying, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, basically the sea level's risen almost a quarter of an inch, 0.23 inches, instead of 0.17 inches, the way they had predicted. One of the researchers is quoted as saying, the rate of rise is getting faster and faster.
Uh-oh.
So maybe they're
Yep.
finally
Faster and faster. No good.
maybe they're finally figuring out, positive feedback loop.
Yippers.
So, yeah. And again, this is the kind of information that the administration is trying to just literally just prevent you from getting. So I don't know if that would make people more mentally healthy, but it makes the planet less. Next story. We're going to stay in Ohio for this one, and our good friends over at the Portsmouth Piketon Residents for Environmental Safety and Security, or the people at PRESS. March 4th, they did a press release. DOE caught lying about contamination levels. And essentially, at the Piketon plant where they did uranium enrichment for many decades, it's terribly contaminated with radioactivity, and they want to parcel it off. They want to sell the contaminated land for industrial development because, can't have land sitting around, right? You got to be making money off it. Unfortunately, they got found out that they did not report that the land that they have is contaminated specifically with technetium-99,
Oopsie doodle.
which was found in contaminated wells. That's an isotope that has a half-life of 211,100 years.
Oh, dear.
So that means that area of Piketon will be unusable for 10 half-lives, which is 2.1 million years.
Alrighty then.
So sorry, DOE, for trying to sneak that by. But luckily, people like our friend Vina Kali at Press, they've been following this for decades, and they know about it. So they're not going to let things like that slip by, even though the powers that be, again, want to ignore the pollution. So they figured, I guess DOE figured, by not telling the buyers that their land was contaminated radioactively, then they could get away with it. So luckily, our friends at Press called them out. Next story, off to Montana. And, we've been reporting quite a bit about the Yellowstone and the bison. Well, at our interview 2 weeks ago, Stephanie C. with Roam Free Nation mentioned that the wolves are getting slaughtered out there in Montana. So we followed up on that. Unfortunately, they had a wolf season this year in Montana, and 344 wolves were killed in like a day and a half. That's more. It's up from last year when only 289 were killed. The quotas that the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Department have set for wolf kills have literally no connection to reality or any kind of environmental science. It's just how many can we get away with killing without exterminating them. And of course, as we've reported before, the need for a hunt is completely fictitious because for the previous 10 years, the wolves in Montana held themselves to a population of 1,100 to 1,200. So wolves know, or interact with their environment in such a way that they maintain their own levels. They don't need people with guns to go in and cull a bunch of them. And in fact, they're trying to bring the population down to 400, which is like a third of how many that the state could handle. Montana has set an arbitrary number of 500, and Wyoming set an arbitrary number of 300, and they're all trying to kill enough wolves to get down to that, paying no attention to the fact that wolves are social animals, and if you just start randomly killing big chunks of your pack, you're going to affect the way the pack functions. You're going to hurt the wolves' behavior. And in fact, what they find is that the more they do this, the less wolves stick together in a pack and do their wolf thing, and the more they just become these wanderers that could show up in the middle of your garden party or whatever,
Right.
because they're being driven from their homes, basically. All right. This is getting harder and harder, but we go from wolves to butterflies. There's a story in Science on March 6th. Rapid butterfly declines across the United States during the 21st century. Basically, they did a survey of surveys. There's like 35 different monitoring programs for butterflies, 76,000 individual surveys that were taken with 554 species by a bunch of volunteers around the country. Different groups do butterfly surveys every year. So they pooled all this data, and there were 12.6 million individual butterflies counted, and they found out that from 2000 to 2020, the butterfly population crashed by 22%.
Oh dear.
And a few species are actually increasing. As you degrade habitat, some species benefit, but 13 times more species are declining compared to the numbers that are increasing. So butterflies are in trouble. I kind of wanted to end on a possibly upbeat note, but unfortunately, this is not the week for that. This is a story it's so bad, even mainstream media is picking it up. This past Wednesday, the Trump EPA announced that it's getting out of the environmental protection business. The Environmental Protection Agency. Well,
What exactly is it going to do then?
It's going to actually. Lee Zeldin, the new chair of the EPA, said their new mission is to increase corporate profits.
Okay.
So that's what they're going to do.
Don't corporations have people to do that?
They got
Why do
lots
they need the
of
government
people.
to do it for them?
I'm not sure. But Guardian 312, one of the many stories on it, Trump officials decimate climate protections and consider axing regulations on greenhouse gases and greenhouse gas findings. So essentially, the Trump administration is going to say no more greenhouse gas. All right, that's it for this week. We'll try to have some better news next week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
No nukes. No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time